anything you learned about the characters in the first book, just throw away. The characters become unrecognizable, to be honest. Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about book series that basically started off as a 5-star and ended up as a 1-star or just really disappointed me. So we're going to jump right into it because I got a couple that I want to talk about. And I think we'll start with one of my biggest disappointments that took me years to read through, and that is the Diviners series. Basically, how I'm going to go about this is talk about the first book, give you a synopsis of the first book, spoiler free, and explain why I really liked the first book and basically why I didn't like the rest. But we're going to keep it spoiler free. If there are any like minor spoilers, I'll say it before I say anything just in case, but I'm trying to keep this as spoiler free as possible. So the first book of the Diviners series, first of all, they should have never changed these covers. I love these covers. And it's funny because it kind of coincides when I started hating the series, is when the new covers came out. So the first book of the Diviners follows Evie O'Neill as our main character, and she has a mystical power of being able to hold on to an item of somebody's and tell you about something from their past. She is kind of a troublemaker, so she used to live in like rural Midwestern America, but her parents couldn't control her anymore, so they sent her to live in New York City with her uncle Will to work in his museum. Other than Evie O'Neill, there are a bunch of other characters that you follow throughout this series. In the first book, one of the main other points of view is Memphis, and he has a totally different other side of New York City, but he is also a diviner that has powers to heal, and most of his story is protecting his little brother and getting to know the other diviners. So the first book of the series actually focuses on a murder mystery, which I thought was really, really cool, and her uncle Will is brought into the case because his museum is like a curiosities museum. So there's some weird symbolism that's going on with the murder and some weird devil worshipping thing they think is going on. So Uncle Will is brought in, Evie gets involved in the case, and from that point on they kind of get involved with the evil that is lurking just under the city. So she meets a bunch of people. They basically come together to try and solve this murder, and they basically find that there's much more going on than is on the surface. So I thought it was really a fun book. I gave it a 5 stars. It was one of my favorite reads the year that I read it. I honestly cannot remember when I read it because it was a really long time ago, but I remember most of this book pretty well, which is, for as many books as I read, books start getting confused when I think back on them a few years. But this one I remember really well. And I think it had a lot to do with the cool mix between a murder mystery and people who had powers, and they just did it really, really well, and the character development was fantastic. I told everyone I knew to read this book because I thought it was so much fun to read. It also takes place in the 1920s era, so it's really, really cool. I really like that era, and it's got like a Great Gatsby vibe to it, but murder and mayhem instead, which is, I was gonna say fun, but I guess that's not really fun. Basically, great characters, great plot line, super fun to read, and it was a quick read considering how large it is. So going into the next books, I actually really liked the second book as well. Lair of Dreams is a continuation of the first book where they're focused on this sleeping sickness that is taking over New York City, and they introduce a new character. They do focus a little more on the side characters compared to Evie from the first book. The first book was definitely like, this is Evie O'Neill, we're focused on Evie. The second book starts branching out into the other characters and the new character because she lives in a different part of New York City. So they want to explore all the different sides of New York City that are dealing with these underlying evil forces. We get involved in the sleeping sickness because 2 of our diviners, including the new one, have powers of sleepwalking. So they notice something is definitely wrong in the sleep side of the world. So they want to figure out what's going on, and all the other diviners obviously get involved, and it is connected to the evil from the first book. The problem is when you get to book 3. Now, I remember most of book 1 and book 2. I don't remember a lot of book 3 because it took me almost a year to read book 3. Book 3, it's really hard to pinpoint what the plot actually was about. They basically, the first 2 books had a central plot. The 3rd book kind of was just like, oh, overarching evil, let's fight it. It seemed like absolutely nothing happened in the 3rd book. I did read King of Crows, the 4th book, recently, and I could not tell you a single thing that happened in book 3 that was important for book 4, except for one major spoiler that I'm not gonna say. I mean, you do learn a lot of backstory, but it's just that, it's just a ton of backstory, and it's a chunky book to just be backstory. So I was really expecting a lot going into the 4th book because of how boring and backstory the 3rd book was. Which brings us to King of Crows. Oh, I had such a problem with this book. It just continued the boringness from the 3rd book. I really needed like a big punch in this book, and there really wasn't one. I also didn't like most of the character development in this book. I thought most of the characters regressed instead of becoming better. Evie was insufferable in this book. Her romances were just so boring at this point. They were too drawn out throughout all 4 books, so at this point you just don't care. There was a side romance that made absolutely no sense. It was very strange. So just a lot of it just felt very strange. Like, it felt like she just didn't know what to do with all of these characters and ran out of book time to really delve into each character the way that they deserved. She should not have had so many characters, to be honest, if she didn't know what she was going to do with all of them. My other major problem with this book is it is the final book in the series, and it spends 80% of the book with all the characters separated into these little groups. So you have 3 different storylines going on at the same time of them being in different parts of America, seeing the evil in different areas, but that's not really important anymore. You did all of that in book 3. Book 4 should have focused on wrapping up character storylines, expanding on the romances, and maybe having the characters really discover who they are. I feel like the only one who got a really good story arc was Theta. She was able to face all of her demons that she dealt with before, and it was awesome. I feel like that needed to be done for Evie and her family, Evie and her powers, Evie and the romances that she was dealing with, and it's just, it was such a letdown. This is another book that, like I said, this took me a year to read, and by the time I was finished, I was just so done with this series, and it's so sad because I really enjoyed the first 2. So I wish she had gone about the 3rd and 4th book a little differently, and I definitely would have given this whole series a 5-star if it had continued on the path that the first 2 were taking. Okay, so the next series is probably my most disappointing one, actually, of the list. The Diviners I spent the most time reading, so it felt really disappointing because I feel like I wasted a lot of my time. This next series, I love her writing. I love all of her other books. All of her other books have gotten 5 stars, and this was one of my most highly anticipated book series. So when it took a left turn at book 3, I've never been so disappointed in my entire life. And this is actually a pretty common opinion in the book world too, so at least I'm not alone with this. So the book series is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. So I love fantasy books. I love Holly Black. I love her writing. She writes pretty much exactly what I want to read. I mean, end of story. She knows exactly what I want, and she delivers most of the time. So The Cruel Prince is definitely, I mean, one of my favorite books. I know it's probably a little excessive to most people, but I really love that book. And I really liked it because I liked the main characters, I liked the romantic interest, I liked the world building. I just thought it was really neat. So the first book, The Cruel Prince, follows Jude and her sister being taken from the human world into Fae. And in Holly Black's books, the Fae world is not kind. This is pretty much all Fae are bad. They don't like humans. They think humans are weak. It's a very interesting story because you have Jude, who is a human, going to school and living in a Fae world, and has a dad who is Fae taking care of them. And it's definitely a romance forward book. The point is the romance. But it's fun if you like Fae, romance, and court intrigue. Definitely highly suggest the first book at least. I really enjoyed the second book as well. The second book, I can't say anything about it because it is entirely spoilers for the end of the first one. So I really can't say anything. It's basically just more court intrigue, more fleshing out the romances, which I really liked. The second book was so good with giving the readers basically what they wanted out of a romance. It's so much fun, and they're pretty short books. Really, most of what we're going to be talking about is the third book, because the third book is the issue. When I got the third book, I looked at it and I immediately said, this is too short. For all of the loose ends and for all of the character development that needed to take place in the third book that I was expecting in the third book, it's too short. It needed to be about 200 pages longer. Queen of Nothing gives you nothing. I feel like that's supposed to be funny, but it gives you absolutely nothing about the characters. Wicked King, the second book, had so much character development, so much everything, and you went into Queen of Nothing with a huge cliffhanger. I mean, the cliffhanger at the end of Wicked King was fantastic. So you go into Queen of Nothing, like, ready for, like, this crazy stuff to happen, and you just want Jew to kick butt and take names, and none of that happens. I mean, a little bit happens, but it just needed more. So I did like some aspects of it, but there just wasn't enough. Like, especially because this is the book where you're supposed to get the final of the romance. Like, all three books are very angsty, and so you're supposed to finally get that closure. Like, if you have an angsty book series, you need some closure at the end. Like, you need it where the characters are together, and that just really, you don't really have any time of them just being together. Which is why I think she came out with King of Elfhame, which I'm not talking about it really, but I will say the King of Elfhame, for me, helped the series. It was a 5-star read. I loved the short stories, bringing back the characters and kind of seeing them after the series. It definitely helped the third book. It needed to exist, but what needs to exist is just a longer version of Queen of Nothing. Let's be honest. So this book series probably makes me the angriest out of all of the series I've read, because for me it had the most potential, because it was 5-star, then like a 2. So it just makes me angry, and I love Holly Black, and I will be picking up her next book series, and hopefully she kind of saw how people felt and how they just wanted more. It wasn't that people didn't like it, it's that they just needed more from her characters and her world. So I don't think that's a bad thing. So the next book series, if I was giving awards out, would earn the award for most disappointing from book 1 to book 2. I gave book 1 a 5, and I think I gave book 2 like a 1.5 or a 2-star. On Goodreads, I may have been generous and gave a 3, but in my heart, it's like a 1 to 2, just because of how disappointed I was. So the next series is Cursebreakers. I feel like a lot of people had the same point of view that I had about this book series, where book 1 was really, really good, and then it just went off the rails. I know there are definitely like a legion of people who love the second book because of how different it was from the first one, but I'm not that person. So the first book, I'm gonna say right off the bat, is basically a mix of ACOTAR and Beauty and the Beast. I mean, you cannot read this book series and not think ACOTAR. I mean, that's all there is to it. Like, the first book is ACOTAR. So basically this book is about Harper, who is from the United States and is accidentally taken while she is trying to rescue a girl from being kidnapped. And she is taken to the Fae world. She meets Prince Ren and Grey, who are the only people left in an abandoned castle because there is a curse that has been placed on this kingdom. So throughout the book, she learns who these people are, what the Fae world is about, and she fights to help break the curse on this kingdom. Again, the things I liked: Beauty and the Beast, ACOTAR feel. I like books about Fae, high fantasy, different worlds, And Harper was a kick-butt female character. I love her. She did not take nothing from anybody. I really liked her character development as the book went on. Like, she learned, in this one book, she had so much character development and learning about herself and basically toughening up to deal with this world and also what she had going on back at home, because she had a lot of problems going on back at home. I did think that the curse was really interesting in this book, and it was an interesting take on the Beauty and the Beast ACOTAR feel. So, I mean, it was not exactly a copy. There definitely was its own magic system, own world. Now, the problem starts for me, because I know some people like the second book, problem starts for me in the second book. Anything you learned about the characters in the first book, just throw away. The characters become unrecognizable, to be honest. The first book is pretty much exclusively in Harper's point of view. So you learn everything about her, Prince Ren, the castle, everything from her point of view. And there are points of view of Ren, so it is very focused on those two together and their romances, and I really like that. The second book just takes a left turn, and it focuses on Grey and a new character from the Kingdom Over. I would be okay with that if they did not dismantle her previous characters to do it. It almost felt like book one was battling book two. Like, hey, these are your favorite characters from book one, now let's turn them into villains in book two. No. Like, my love for Harper was damaged by book two because she doesn't turn evil. No one turns evil. She just becomes weak. Like, in the first book, she doesn't take anything from Prince Ren. When he tries to pull stuff, she's like, no. In this second book, she just kind of lets him do what he wants. And it is, I don't know what the author was thinking. This series much more turned into a book about Grey. I feel like she wrote the first book and was like, oh, Grey is my favorite character, let's make the rest of the series about him. So it was just not it for me. My other issues with the second book are there's just a lot of traveling, a lot of talking, not a lot of action. It's just, I mean, it basically feels like a filler book. It's like, hey, these are the new characters I want you focused on. We're going to throw as much information at you as possible, but not actually show you anything. So for me, it was just not, I'm not interested in those kind of books, especially when it felt like I was rereading a first book of a series. It's almost like a Curse So Dark and Lonely didn't exist, and the second book was the first book. Probably the worst part of book two is she made one of the characters basically act in a manner that is unforgivable. To me, at least. To me, there is no redemption arc for that person, and it ruined the series for me. So going into book three, when she tries to do redemption arcs, when she tries to basically explain why they acted the way that they did to try and make you forgive them, there was just no, absolutely not. When the third book finally rolled around, I just really didn't care. I didn't like most of the characters anymore. I just wasn't interested in it. And I feel like if she had just stuck with the main characters and focused on breaking the curse with the main characters, and I honestly don't know how you would fix this series. Like, I was thinking about how you would fix this series because I really liked the first book, and I don't know how you would fix this series. It just takes such a nosedive in the second book that I don't think there's a way to fix it in the third one. She would need to rewrite both books 2 and 3 in a completely different manner. Like, I'm okay with having Grey's point of view and the new character's point of view. Just don't make them these glorified heroes, and that's what you should care about. So it just needs a lot of, it's just, no, it's so disappointing. And this has given me such trust issues in her books. Like, she just came out with a new series, and I think she's coming out with another one. I think she has 2 different book series coming out at the same time. And I have Defy the Night upstairs, and I'm terrified to read it because I'll probably like the first book, but will I like the rest of the series? I don't know if I'm willing to risk it. So I have a lot of trust issues with this author, and we'll see basically where I go from here, because I don't know how willing I am to read any more of her books. So the next series is not as well known as the other series that I've probably talked about, but it is equally as disappointing, and I feel really bad for all the people that I recommended this book to. So the next book series is the Ace of Shades series. Not only am I disappointed in these books plot-wise, I'm disappointed in them because I love the covers. They have some of my favorite covers. So that's Ace of Shades, love that. King of Fools, I also love the spines. King of Fools and Queen of Volts. They have absolutely some of my favorite covers. So, yikes. I'm definitely going to keep them because, number one, I love the first book. Number two, they're just so pretty. Ace of Shades, I rated 5 stars, and I believe the other 2 books I rated 2 or 3. 3 is probably generous, but both books had good endings, and that tends to bump my rating up. So if you look at the book as a whole, they're both probably 2. Probably rated them higher because I'm a mood rater as well as a reader. So if I really like the ending, it's gonna get bumped up. But as a whole, no, it wasn't worth the time. So Ace of Shades is about our main character, N, who is looking for her mom in what they classify as the City of Sin, and she honestly has no idea what she's doing. She is from a nice area, and she basically finds out her mom goes missing, and she knows where to look for her. So she ends up in this nasty area. I think Ketterdam from Six of Crows. Think of someone coming to Ketterdam and not knowing what they're doing. And she has no idea what she's getting herself into by looking for her mom in this place. She quickly meets Levi, who is our other main character, and it turns out that he is somebody who knows the city really well. He is pretty much Kaz in this book. He is a gang lord who's in charge of the Irons. This world is very into card sharks, card dealing, dens of iniquity. So his Irons run a lot of card things, card dens. I don't even, because I guess they're not really like casinos. Like, you can definitely have casinos, but they're not specifically casinos. Levi decides to help her because he is desperately in need of money, and in this world, money is volts. She has money to spare and needs to find her mom and needs a guide, so she hires Levi, and basically they start working together to find where N's mother has gone. Because of this deal, with their combined problems, they get pulled into some shady stuff that they may not escape from. This book was really fun. It felt, like I said, a little bit like Six of Crows. Definitely not, I love Six of Crows, so definitely not up that level, but it was still a 5-star read for me. Having that mission of finding her mom and discovering what happened to her and some of the dark history of the city, I really, really enjoyed it. It had enough backstory that you were fully involved in the world, but not too much that you were starting to get bogged down in it. So this is definitely a world building book because it is very different than anything that I've read. It's definitely real world mixed with fantasy, so people have powers. Everyone has a major power and a minor power depending on who their families are. And they use those in the city. They're important. Most people have their jobs depending on what their powers are. And there's even a class of people that does not exist anymore because they were rooted out based on their very, very strong abilities. So we learn all about that information about N's history, Levi's history, and where they go from there. The ending of this book was fantastic as well. There was a really cool cliffhanger that went into the second book, and the characters were phenomenal. And it was such a strong female character. Levi was a seedy, interesting character that made everyone's life a little more difficult, but you still loved him. So there was a lot going on, but it was easy to understand, and you loved the characters. So I told everyone to read this book, and then I felt bad when I read the second one. So King of Fools is the second book, and it definitely follows the first book. However, the series becomes so slow paced at this point. Ace of Shades I felt like moved very quickly, and King of Fools had pretty much the opposite. There was great relationship building in the first book, and I feel like she decided that it was too good, so she tanked the characters' relationships in this book. She decided she wanted as much conflict as she could possibly create and just absolutely tanked some of the characters. I get you don't want, like, if you're gonna have a couple in the first book and it's gonna be a trilogy or a long series, you need a little bit of conflict to keep the relationship interesting. But oh my gosh, it seemed like she hated these characters together. So she was just like, nah, let's ruin them. No, I don't like that. I really don't like that. I don't like it when you ruin a character's relationship with another character to the point where you would rather see them alone than with this character. And that's what happened. I did not want to see these two specific characters together by the end of the series. I could not stand them together by the end because it was toxic. It was so toxic, and no thank you. And honestly, the second book was just boring. I was so bored reading it. This is another series that took me forever to read, and I really probably should have DNF'd it in the second book, but I was way too stubborn to. I was hoping that the third book would be better and that the second book was just a filler, because again, that's what it felt like. The second book felt just like an enormous filler. There was no growth in the characters. Like I said before, it felt like most of the characters regressed immensely. I feel like a lot of the characters lost their motivations that they had found in the first book. They were lost. They didn't know what to do with themselves. They were just constantly in bad situations that they didn't know how to get out of, but then would mystically get out of magically. A minor spoiler for book 2. Minor. There was a character death. I'm not going to say who it was. There is a character death, and it felt absolutely pointless, and I hated it. I can deal with a lot of deaths in books. I don't love them, but if they help the plot, I can accept them. I can't accept this death. It had no point to it whatsoever except to give a new character in book 2 more motivation in book 3. And I didn't even like her character. No, it was so bad. I honestly couldn't tell you most of the stuff that happened in book 2 and 3 because it was just boring. There was a lot of, she recycled conflicts. So this is something I have a big pet peeve in books where a conflict is resolved and then it comes up again in a later book in a different way. So this isn't really a spoiler, but Levi, the gang leader of the Irons have some money problems. They're one of the lower ranking gangs in this book series. So they run into a bunch of money problems and Levi is able to solve them. And then they go bankrupt again in like book 2, and I'm pretty sure they'll go bankrupt again in book 3. So I hate recycling ideas like that. I just want to move on because then it feels like I'm just reading the same book again. It leaves less room for other things to get resolved. There's no reason these books need to be as long as they are because of that. So I feel like she just got carried away. I did not like the end of the third book though. I liked how everything was wrapped up until the end. No character development. The characters don't go anywhere from here. And it felt like I was at the back at the beginning of book 1. And maybe that was on purpose to have like a cyclical thing, but it just felt like nothing was accomplished. And I feel like I wasted my time. If you like character development in long books, you might like this, but I did not. So those are the books that I started out 5 stars and ended up as a 2, 1 star, just really disappointed in the series. Like, subscribe, comment. I would love to hear about other series that maybe you guys thought started off really strong and kind of went downhill from there. I'd love to hear what you guys say about these books. I would love some differing opinions, especially Diviners. I've noticed Diviners has a lot of really high ratings for the final books, and I'm really curious as to why people really like the end of those books and maybe change my mind about it, which would be awesome. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next video.